Story 1. I play guitar and bass in pit orchestras for the theatrical companies in the area where I live. Several years back, I was playing for a production of a Christmas show featuring 1960s Christmas songs. For this show, the instrumental ensemble was located on stage, in sight of the audience. One night, after I had taken my spot on stage, and was in the process of verifying that my guitar was in tune, in the moments immediately preceding the start of the show, a lady from the audience actually walked up on the stage and insisted that I turn off the light on my music stand because she found it distracting. I informed her that I needed the stand light so that I could see my sheet music under the various stage lighting configurations used during the show. She then insisted that I either turn off my light or move to a different part of the stage so that she would not be distracted by my stand light. I explained that the position of the instrumental ensemble was firmly established based on the configuration of the stage scenery and the design of the show's choreography, so moving one member of the band to the other side of the stage was simply not feasible. I suggested that since the venue had general admission seating, and on that evening, we were at approximately 50% of the seating capacity, an alternative solution would be that she take advantage of the many available options of other seating locations that would likely involve lines of sight, not adversely impacted by my stand light. Her reply was that she had the center seat in the front row, so she had no intention of moving from that location. She then asked to speak to the theater manager. Since at that time I was the president of the board of directors for that theater company, I informed her that she was speaking to the top of the org chart in the company. She returned to her seat and proceeded to dramatically hold her program up to shield her eyes from the offense of my stand light. Looking back, I would like to say that I resisted the urge at intermission to change the light bulb in my stand light from a low-wattage blue frosted bulb to a more modern unfrosted LED bulb that emitted much more light. But I did not resist that temptation that evening. Story 2. I live in an apartment complex with my boyfriend. I work overnight, so usually I'm asleep most of the day. Yesterday, my boyfriend went out and bought stuff to make up an Easter basket for me, something we did for each other last year, but hadn't really talked about doing this year because of the pandemic. He set the basket up and left it in the passenger seat of my car for me to find when I went to work. This morning, I got home around 7:30, and as I was walking through the parking lot, a couple of the neighbor kids were playing outside. I'm pretty sure they're brothers, as I always see them together, and I passed them to go upstairs while carrying my basket. The basket itself is a pink wicker basket. It has a small pink stuffed bunny, a giant lollipop set, a chocolate bunny, and plenty of colored eggs in it. I had just taken a melatonin and put my sleep mask on to try to go to bed when I hear a knock at my door. My boyfriend is fast asleep, so I figured I might as well look through the peephole to see if it was an Amazon delivery or something. I peek through and see my neighbor from over the stairs, so I open it up. The two boys from earlier were by her door watching our conversation. The entitled mother: "My boys said you had an Easter basket." Me: "Ooh, yeah? Okay, so give it to them." "I'm sorry?" "Give them the Easter basket. You're an adult. Why do you even have one?" "I'm not going to give your boys my Easter basket." "Well, why not? Do you hate Jesus or something?" I stood there for a second with a confused look on my face before she snapped: "Give them the basket already." "Look, I've lived here almost a year. I see your kids all the time, and I've never really interacted with them. But they seem like fine kids. Even if that is true, though, I don't have to give them anything, especially not something that was given to me as a gift. If they want Easter baskets, and you want them to have Easter baskets, why don't you buy the supplies and make them up yourself?" "Why should I have to do that when there's one already made up here?" "Brat, because it isn't yours?" "Well, I'm sure it'll get much better use if my boys have it rather than you. Hand it over, or I'm going to call the police and tell them some girl from this apartment stole their basket." "You might think it'll get more usage from your boys than it will from me, but it's all sweets that I'm going to eat to keep me awake during my 12-hour shift tonight, the one I need to go to sleep before if you would leave me be." Also, I even still have the basket I got from him last year, and I'll let you in on a secret. It holds all my toys. Happy Easter." After that, I closed the door in her face. I could hear her through the door give off one of those partial groan, partial screams, and she actually called the police on speaker right outside my door. So I called the non-emergency line and said if a woman called about someone from our address stealing her kid's Easter basket that she was delusional, and told them what happened. Police still haven't shown up, and now it's time for me to snooze. Happy Easter, all. Edit. I know my boyfriend shouldn't have gone to get the Easter basket during the pandemic. I've told him multiple times not to leave except for work and groceries. Both of us are essential employees, but no matter how many times I get on to him, he keeps going to the store for non-essentials. I have gotten onto him multiple times, and he just doesn't listen to me. I did thank him for the basket and the thought behind it, but then got onto him for going out for it. It's possible the police did show up after I fell asleep, but if so, I have no recollection of it. Melatonin knocks me out, and it's hard to wake me up even without it. So if anyone would have answered the door, it would have been my boyfriend, who also used to be a police officer. Though, I don't think they did show up because we got a notice saying that during the pandemic the police would not be showing up on calls for things like petty theft. And it even had assault on the list, which blew my mind. To those of you saying I should have slammed the door in her face right after she asked, you're right. I wish I had, so I wouldn't have had to deal with such stupidity when I was so tired already. To those of you saying I shouldn't have opened the door regardless because of the pandemic, you're also right. The only reason I opened the door was because I recognized her as my neighbor, and I know she's a single mother with 3 kids in her home, and to my knowledge she isn't working at the moment. So I thought she was just coming to ask for something like milk or a couple eggs or something, which I would have probably given her if that were the case. To those of you saying to report her to my apartment management, my boyfriend has been living in this complex for over 5 years and is very close with management. So if anyone would report anything he or I did, management would call him and ask, "Hey, what happened with so-and-so?" But we've reported our upstairs neighbor for things, and nothing has been done about it. Those of you saying just to report it for a paper trail, I've lived in the apartment almost a year and haven't had an issue with a family until today. So I don't think much more will happen with her, or at least I hope not. Story 3. So I, 31-year-old male, was raised mostly by my grandparents. My mother, 50-year-old female, lived with us, but was verbally abusive and somewhat absent. My father, 51-year-old male, never lived with me and wasn't involved in my day-to-day life. He and my mother never married, and I lived only with my grandparents starting in 10th grade. My father had custody of my younger half-brother, now 27-year-old male, and eventually married my second stepmother, 50-year-old female, who had 2 children of her own. Together, they also had 2 younger children, who are now 13 and 8 years old. Growing up, my father rarely showed up to my sports games, school events, or even Father's Day. He rarely contributed financially. I found out when I was 18 that he had not been keeping up with his child support. When I confronted him about it, he became furious and said he wished he had never met my mother. He then cut off contact with me for 6 months until I reached out again on his birthday, trying to be the bigger person. From my late teens through my 20s, I was always the one initiating contact. Despite moving almost 2 hours away for university, I was the one planning visits, buying gifts for his younger children, and reaching out for birthdays, holidays, and so on. He rarely reciprocated. I've only ever been invited to a few events. When I moved out in 2021 with my partner after university, I moved back in with my grandparents for a few years. I started pulling back a bit. At that point, I had also started therapy for physical and mental health issues and began unpacking a lot of family trauma. My half-brother, his son, now 27 years old, went no contact with him 5 years ago and moved out due to physical and verbal mistreatment. I also found out that similar incidents occurred with his ex-wife, my first stepmother, and my mother. Knowing this, I didn't feel safe being emotionally vulnerable with him, especially because he tends to lash out when confronted. In 2023, I reached out to make Christmas plans like I always do, and my stepmother said my father was sick. I followed up a few weeks later, offering to drop off gifts for the children, but didn't get a response for another month. When my father finally replied, it was out of the blue. He said my stepsister, 22-year-old female, and he got into an argument, and she made a comment that I wanted nothing to do with him. Then, he texted me saying, "Have a nice life." I clarified that I never said that and tried to have a real conversation about how distant our relationship has been. I asked if we could meet one-on-one. He said he'd get back to me. I also asked what happened between them, but he wouldn't tell me. Shortly after, I found out my stepsister had called emergency services on him due to how he was treating the youngest children, which is what started their argument. He also sent a threatening message to my half-brother, the one who went no contact, saying he'd show up at his work to fight him. My stepbrother, 29-year-old male, and he also exchanged heated words. When I asked my stepmother what was going on, she claimed to know nothing. I suggested we talk as a family to put an end to all this, but none of my siblings were open to it. I asked my father to let me know his schedule so we could meet one-on-one and invited him to come over to my place, since he, my 2 step-siblings, and my 2 youngest half-siblings all live together under my stepmother's roof. My father said he'd let me know. 9 months went by, and I didn't hear from him. I then found out that I wasn't invited to my youngest sibling's birthday party, which was a first. Even my step-siblings, who have never gotten along with my father, still got invites. Prior to this, even my half-brother, who went no contact, would be invited. When I asked my father and stepmother why, my father told me he said not to invite me. I said that made no sense, considering I had been reaching out to still wish them happy birthdays, holidays, and happy Mother's and Father's Day, while waiting for him to get back to me, and he never did. Eventually, my stepmother offered to schedule a meeting with the 3 of us. My father agreed, and then tried to cancel behind her back so she wouldn't be there. He asked when I could meet one-on-one instead. I refused to change the date, since he never got back to me last time for 9 months, and the only times he tried to meet up were twice before. Once when he messaged me near midnight to meet first thing in the morning, but I had plans, and another time after I called him out about the birthday situation. He asked if I could meet that same day during work hours. So when I said let's stick to the plan with my stepmother, he completely lost his temper. He berated me, threatened me, and called me insulting names. I blocked him. My stepmother said she understood and offered to bring the children to visit me instead, so I could still give them their Christmas gifts. By this time, it was almost Christmas of 2024. But days before the visit, she told me my father had forbidden her from letting me see the children, and that he was cutting me off until I was man enough to speak to him. That confused me, because I had asked to meet multiple times and requested that he let me know his schedule so we could plan a date in advance, and each time, he either ignored me or suggested impossible times, like texting at midnight or during work hours for same-day plans. Since then, my stepmother has chosen to side with him. She admitted he was in the wrong, but said she wouldn't argue with him. So I stopped reaching out to them. I didn't message her Happy Mother's Day or send either of them birthday wishes this year. To clarify, I'm still open to speaking with my stepmother. She's reached out to me a few times over text a few months after all this happened to send me pictures of my youngest half-siblings, and we've had some brief conversations. But I'm just exhausted from all of this, from the emotional roller coaster, the lack of accountability, and from them pretending like nothing ever happened. Story 4. It was around 2 p.m., right in the middle of our lunch rush. The dining room was packed with the usual crowd of office workers grabbing a quick bite. I was managing the front of house when this woman walked in. She had this attitude from the moment she stepped through the door, looking around like our place wasn't good enough for her. She demanded the best table, even though we had a wait list, but I managed to seat her at a decent spot by the window. From the start, she was difficult. She questioned our server about every single ingredient in multiple dishes, complained about the music being too loud, then too quiet, and sent back her water because it wasn't cold enough. I could see our server getting frustrated, but we deal with difficult customers all the time. Nothing too unusual yet. She finally ordered our signature chicken parmesan with a side of garlic mashed potatoes. Simple enough. My chef prepared it perfectly, same way he's made it hundreds of times before. But when the server brought it out, she immediately called him back over. She complained that the chicken was dry and overcooked, calling it garbage and demanding that the server take it back and tell the chef to make it right this time. The server brought it back to the kitchen. My chef looked confused because the chicken looked fine to him, but he made another one anyway. Customer service and all that. Second plate goes out, and within 5 minutes she was calling the server again. She said this one was even worse than the first and asked what kind of establishment we were running. She demanded to speak to the manager immediately. That's when I went over to her table. I tried to be diplomatic, offered to comp her meal, suggested other dishes she might prefer. But she wasn't having any of it. She told me she didn't want anything else from this pathetic excuse for a restaurant and wanted the chef to come out and explain why he couldn't cook a simple piece of chicken properly. I explained that I was the owner and I was there to resolve the issue, but the chef was busy with other orders. She said she didn't care if I was the owner, the president, or the pope. She wanted that incompetent chef out there immediately, or she was going to make sure everyone knew how terrible this place was. She was getting louder, and other customers were starting to stare. I offered her a full refund and asked her to lower her voice. That's when she really lost it. She yelled at me not to tell her to lower her voice, saying she was the customer and would speak however she wanted. If the chef wouldn't come out to her, then she would go back to him herself. Before I could stop her, she stood up and walked toward the kitchen. I followed right behind her, trying to get her to come back to her table. The kitchen door swung open, and she burst in like she owned the place. My chef was working on 3 different orders when she stormed in. The kitchen was hot, busy, and definitely not a place for customers. He looked up, surprised and confused. He told her she couldn't be back there because it was a working kitchen. She screamed at him, asking what was wrong with him and why he kept ruining her food. She demanded to know if he could even cook a simple piece of chicken. My chef explained that he had made her dish exactly how they always made it, and if she didn't like it, they could try something else, but she needed to go back to her table. She yelled at him not to tell her what she needed to do, calling him incompetent and threatening to make sure everyone knew it. She started screaming at him while he was trying to work. My other kitchen staff stopped what they were doing because the situation was getting out of hand. I was trying to get her to leave the kitchen, but she was completely focused on my chef. My chef pleaded with her to just go back to her seat so they could figure things out, but she refused and said he was going to listen to her right then and there. That's when things went from bad to dangerous. She noticed the pan of oil my chef had been using to fry some appetizers. It was still hot, probably around 350 degrees. She reached for it before anyone could react. She said that maybe throwing hot oil would teach him to cook properly. She grabbed the handle and swung it toward my chef. Thank God he saw it coming and jumped backward. The oil splashed across the floor where he had been standing just a second before. If he hadn't moved, it would have hit him directly in the chest and face. The kitchen erupted. My sous chef immediately tackled her from behind while my prep cook grabbed her arms. She was still screaming and trying to fight them off, but they managed to get her on the ground and hold her there. I shouted for someone to call 911 right away. My server was already on the phone with the police. Karen kept yelling about how we were assaulting her and threatening to sue everyone. She tried to claim that she was just trying to show my chef how hot the oil was, but we all saw her swing that pan at him with full force. The police arrived within 10 minutes. They took statements from everyone who witnessed what happened. The whole thing was caught on our security cameras too, which made their job easier. Karen tried to play the victim, saying we had attacked her first, but the video evidence was pretty clear. The officer told her she was under arrest for assault with a dangerous weapon and read her rights. When they put the handcuffs on her, she was still yelling about how unfair it all was and demanding to speak to their supervisor. The other customers had mostly cleared out by then, which I couldn't blame them for. We had to shut down the kitchen for the rest of the day to clean up the oil and deal with the police investigation. My chef was pretty shaken up, understandably. Hot oil can cause third-degree burns instantly, and if it had hit his face, it could have blinded him or worse. The whole incident cost us probably $2,000 in lost business and cleaning costs. We also had to hire a lawyer to deal with the legal side of things, since Karen initially tried to sue us for restraining her. Turns out this wasn't her first rodeo. The police told us she had previous arrests for similar incidents at other businesses. Apparently, she had a pattern of causing scenes in restaurants and retail stores when things didn't go exactly her way. 3 months later, we got the call that she had been sentenced to 18 months in prison for assault with a dangerous weapon. Plus, she had to pay restitution for our damages and court costs. The judge apparently wasn't impressed with her excuse that she was just trying to make a point about customer service. My chef still works for me, and he's never had another incident like that. We did install a better security system, and now we have a strict policy about customers entering the kitchen area. We also trained all our staff on how to handle aggressive customers before they escalate to that level. When we reviewed the security footage later, we could see that both plates of chicken she sent back looked perfectly fine. She was just looking for a reason to cause trouble from the moment she walked in. Some people just can't be satisfied, no matter what you do for them. Story 5. Texas has this strange idea that providing you a driver's license the day you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles is risky. As such, they give you a piece of paper printed out in black and white and mail you the actual license at a later date. This is a bit strange as it creates a period where people carry a valid legal document that looks like a fifth grader passed a headshot into Microsoft Paint. This created an awkward dynamic when I worked at a gas station. What do people go to gas stations for? After gas, the most common things are lottery, beer, and smoke. All of these are age-restricted and have rather intense laws surrounding unlawful sales. To help avoid the nasty fine-sec associated with these, my gas station had a pair of rules. For anyone you're not 100% sure is over 30, ask if they're over 30 and card them if you're not convinced they're older than 30 after said answer yes. The question was stupid. But whatever. Scan all IDs to ensure they're legitimate documents and not fakes. At their face, these sound reasonable. Though, the second caused an odd situation where fancier states had 3D barcodes instead of magnetic strips, meaning I couldn't sell. And this story is obviously heading towards the paper the Department of Motor Vehicles gives people. Here's one such story. It's a small rush, 3-4 people in line, and a younger guy comes in to buy beer. I'm honestly not sure if he's 21, so he's clearly not 30. I ask the nonsensical question because really, I can be fired if I just card him without asking the question. He tells me he's not older than 30. I ask for his ID, and he fumbles to pull out the dreaded paper ID. Now, the combination of Texas and my employer have put everyone into a frustrating situation. In addition to Texas using these silly paper IDs, state law also requires you to get an acceptable ID before making any sale once you've asked for ID. In other words, you can't ask for ID and then determine you believe they're old enough. If you doubt it enough to ask, you're liable for any sale. I see the ID and immediately feel bad. I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to take that ID. I recommend trying the gas station down the street that has different ownership and potentially more consumer-friendly rules. He provided the common response to ask why I can't take it. I explained to him the corporate policy requires I scan the magnetic strip of all IDs to verify their authenticity, and they've explicitly decided against waiving that for the paper IDs. He instantly gets furious and tells me to scan the ID. This one caught me off a bit, and I asked him, "Are you serious?" To which he told me, "Yes, now scan my damn ID." Befuddled, I take the folded-up piece of paper and slide it through the magnetic strip reader. "Sorry, sir, it didn't scan." This started a chain of events where each thing seemed more unrealistic. His response was, "You didn't even try." I asked if he'd like me to try harder to scan the ID, and he said he did. I looked at him confused and tried several different ways to slide this folded-up piece of paper, unfolded piece of paper, slowly slide, quickly slide, used multiple scanners, etc. to get it to scan. Nope, still didn't scan. I hand it back to him, and he's over the top at this point. It's also worth noting the line behind him is now about 10 people strong, including a few regulars watching in amazement as I'm remaining calm. He starts cussing me out and demands a contact for my manager. I pull out our paperwork and provide him a number for our corporate office. "No, stupid, I want your manager, not your corporate office." "Okay, I gave you my manager's manager." I gladly handed him the store's number, which would come to me, and shared the hours my manager typically worked, so he'd be free to try to call. After he left, I made a point to apologize to each person in line for the extra wait, while each also expressed surprise I hadn't snapped at dude. Needless to say, he never made that call to my manager. Though, I don't know if he ever found his beer. Story 6. When I was 22, my extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, etc., began asking me why I wasn't married yet. I spent my childhood and early 20s in a fairly conservative North Indian state, and people in those areas tend to be deeply misogynistic, and the only way a woman has any value in their eyes is if she's attached to a man. Her own accomplishments, talents, etc. are of no value. So it wasn't all that surprising when I began getting these ridiculous questions about marriage while I was still in college. I had recently lost a lot of weight, and for the first time I actually looked good in jeans. My weight loss seemed to cause their queries to reach whole new levels of idiocy. You see, they all assumed that the only reason I had lost weight was so I could land a husband. Surely I hadn't done it for the sake of my own health and well-being, or because I wanted to look good for myself. That would be preposterous. My aunt was friends with a matchmaker. Matchmakers in India are these annoying middle-aged women who have nothing better to do than to go around carrying photographs and info about eligible bachelors and bachelorettes and share them with the families of young men and women who are looking to marry them off. My aunt's friend was no different. She showed my aunt a picture of some guy in his late 20s who also had a great job and was from a respectable family. Let's call this guy Ajay. My aunt shared the picture and the info with my grandmother, the grandmother who stole my clothes and made sure I stayed fat. Between the two of them, they decided that Ajay, whom I had never met before, would be the perfect match for me. Keep in mind that neither I nor my dad had any inkling of what was going on. One afternoon, I think it was Sunday, my aunt came over when I wasn't home. She told my dad to get his daughter dressed up and pretty because she had promised me to a guy and his parents were coming over to see me that very evening. The tone in which she spoke made it sound like she had done me and my dad a big favor. My dad was shocked and asked what the hell she was talking about. She told him she had taken it upon herself to find a groom for me, without my knowledge or consent, and taken some of the burden off his shoulders, and that their mother, my grandmother, had approved of the match. My dad told her he would have to speak to me first, and whether the guy's parents can come over or not depends on what I have to do today about this. The little brat actually tried to convince my dad that my consent wasn't necessary, and that as elders they had every right to make this decision for me. But my dad wasn't having it. When I came home a few hours later, my aunt greeted me with a hug. This was enough to send red flags flying everywhere. I asked her what was going on, and she gleefully told me that she had done, and how her proposition had my grandmother's blessings. I told her that I was in no mood to have an arranged marriage, not then, not ever. She looked shocked, and asked how I could say such a thing after all the trouble she's been through in order to find such a wonderful young man for me. I decided to get dirty. I told her if the wonderful young man is such a good person, why doesn't she go marry him? My dad heard this and told me to watch my language. I told him I would if she knew her place and knew not to poke her nose where it doesn't belong. My grandmother had heard the commotion from her room and called out to my dad. She began telling him about how she had seen the guy's picture and the matchmaker had told them all about his family, and how a match like this may not come along again. My dad told her that he would never force his daughter to marry if she doesn't want to. My stepmom said the same. I merely told her she was insane and belongs in a lunatic asylum. This, of course, caused both Grandmonster and Crazy Aunt to fake cry and go on and on about how my dad doesn't trust them to make the right decision for his daughter, and that they were family and family has the right to make decisions for each other. I wasn't going to budge, however, and told them I wasn't going to meet the guy or his parents, and Aunt better cancel the meeting if she knows what's good for her. Aunt left our house grumbling. But the drama was far from over. My Grandmonster, in order to emotionally blackmail my dad into agreeing to the match, with or without my consent, stopped eating. Anytime food was brought to her, she would break into crocodile tears and whine about how my dad was dishonoring her wishes. As she was diabetic, her health began to deteriorate. My dad was scared. One evening, he and my stepmom sat me down and asked if I would consider the proposal and just have a meeting with Ajay's family. I was still adamant and said no. My aunt came over again and said she had great news, as Ajay's parents were still interested in meeting me and they would allow me to study and have a career after I married their son. I asked her what part of the word no she did not understand the last time we spoke, and who the hell Ajay's parents think they are to allow me to do anything. Aunt once again flew into an impotent rage and asked how I could be so selfish. How I could disobey my family like this, and some other nonsense about how marriage is a union between families and not just individuals, and how in her days, girls were married off as soon as they reached adulthood, whether they liked it or not. I let her go on for some time as her little hissy fit was quite amusing to me. After she exhausted herself, I told her that if she, Grandmonster, or even my parents ever try to force me into this marriage, I was going to commit. And if I survived, the cops would know that I did it because I was being forced to marry against my will, and all involved would be in a world of trouble. Even if I died, I would leave behind enough evidence in the form of emails to all my friends and college professors detailing how I was being mentally tortured so I could be forced into this marriage. Both outcomes would result in all of them in deep legal trouble. I even showed them the email I had already written. All I had to do was send it. And if any of them even think of locking me up and taking away my phone, laptop, etc., they should remember that my vocal cords still work, and I would gather the entire neighborhood with my screams and cops would surely be called. As I spoke, my aunt's eyes kept getting wider and wider. She was in shock, but she knew me well enough to know that I was very capable of doing all of this. She left quietly. Grandmonster must have heard every word, because her hunger strike came to an end. My aunt never tried to look for a match for me again. Later, my dad told me that he was only asking me to think about the match, and that he would never force me to do something I didn't want to do. I told him I knew that, and assured him that my threats were only meant to scare my aunt. And they worked.